So one of my favourite bits of lockdown number one was reading a story to you all. So I've chosen a new story. It's disappearing magically. This is WarHorse by Michael Morpurgo. And it's a great story because it's about World War One, but it looks at the subject of the war from the perspective of the relationship between a man and his horse, because horses were really important in World War One. So this is WarHorse by Michael Morpurgo, and I hope you enjoy it. Author's notes. In the old school they use now for the village hall, below the clock, that had always stood at 1 minute past 10, hangs a small dusty painting of a horse. He stands, a splendid red beret with a remarkable white cross emblazoned on his forehead, and with 4 perfectly matched white socks. He looks wistfully out of the picture, his ears pricked forward, his head turned as if he was just noticed us standing there. To many who glance up at it casually, as they might do when the hall is open for a parish meeting, for harvest suppers or evening socials, it's merely a tarnished old oil painting of some unknown horse by a competent but anonymous author. To them, the picture's so familiar that it commands little attention. But those who look more closely will see, written in faded copper plate writing at the bottom of the bronze frame, Joey, painted by Captain James Nichols, autumn 1914. Some in the village, only a very few now, and fewer as every year go by, remember Joey as he was. His story is written so that neither he, nor those who knew him, nor the war they lived and died in, will ever be forgotten. Chapter 1. My earliest memories are a confusion of hilly fields and dark, damp stables, and rats that scampered along the beams above my head. But I remember well enough the day of the horse sale. The terror of it stayed with me all my life. I was not yet 6 months old, a gangling, leggy colt who had never been further from a few feet from my mother. We were parted that day in the terrible hubbub of the auction ring, and I would never see her again. She was a fine working farm horse, getting on in years, but with all the strength and stamina of an Irish draft horse, quite evident in her fore and hind quarters. She was sold within minutes, and before I could follow her through the gates, she was whisked out of the ring and away. But somehow I was more difficult to dispose of. Perhaps it was the wild look in my eye as I circled the ring in a desperate search for my mother, or perhaps it was that none of the farmers and the gypsies that were looking for a spindly-looking half-thoroughbred colt. But whatever the reason, they were a long time haggling over how little I was worth before I heard a hammer go down and I was driven out through the gates into the pen outside. "Not bad for 3 guineas, is he?" "Oh yeah, my little firebrand, not bad at all." The voice was harsh and thick with drink, and it belonged quite evidently to my owner. I shall not call him my master, for only one man was ever my master. My owner had a rope in his hand and was clambered into the pen following. My owner had a rope in his hand and clambered into the pen, followed by 3 or 4 of his red-faced friends. Each one carried a rope. They had taken off their hats and jacket and rolled up their sleeves, and they were all laughing as they came towards me. I had as yet been touched by no man and backed away from them until I felt the bars of the pen behind me and could go no further. They seemed to lunge at me all at once, but they were slow, and I managed to slip past them and into the middle of the pen, where I turned to face them again. They'd stopped laughing now. I screamed for my mother and heard her echoey reply in the far distance. It was towards that cry that I bolted, half charged, half jumping the rails, so that I caught my off foreleg as I tried to clamber over and was stranded there. I was grabbed roughly by the mane and the tail, and I felt a rope tighten around my neck before I was thrown to the ground and held there, with a man sitting, it seemed, on every part of me. I struggled until I was weak, kicked out violently every time I felt them relax, but there were too many and too strong for me. I felt the halter slip around my head and tighten around my neck and face. "So you're quite a fighter, are you?" said my owner, tightening the rope and smiling through gritted teeth. I like a fighter, but I'll break you one way or other. Quit your little fighting. Quite a little fighting cock you are, but you'll be eaten out of my hand quite as quick as a twig. I was dragged along the lane, tied on a short rope to the tailboard of a farm cart, so that every twist and turn wrenched at my neck. By the time we reached the farm lane and rumbled over the bridge into the stable yard, that was to become my home, I was soaked with exhaustion, and the halter had rubbed my face raw. My one consolation, as I was hauled into the stables that first evening, was the knowledge that I was not alone. The old horse that had been pulling the cart all the way back from the market was led into the stable next to mine. As she went in, she stopped to look over my door and nickered gently. I was about to venture away from the back of my stable when my new owner brought his crop down on her side with such a violent blow that I recoiled once again and huddled into the corner against the wall. Get in there, you old ratbag, he bellowed. Proper nuisance you are, Zoe, and I don't want you teaching the young uns your old tricks. But in that short moment, I had caught a glimpse of kindness and sympathy that the old mare cooled my panic and soothed my spirit. I was left there with no water and no food while he stumbled off across the cobbles and up into the farmhouse beyond. There was the sound of slamming doors and the raised voices beyond. I heard footsteps running back across the yard and excited voices coming closer. Two heads appeared at my door. One was that of a young boy who looked at me for a long time, considering me carefully before his face broke into a beaming smile. Mother, he said deliberately, that will be a wonderful and brave horse. Look how he holds his head. And then, look at him, Mother. He's wet through to the skin. I'll have to rub him down. But your father said to leave him, Albert, said the boy's mother. Said it'll do him good to be left alone. He told you not to touch him. Mother, said Albert, slipping back the bolts of the stable door. When father's drunk, he doesn't know what he's saying or what he's doing. He's always drunk on market days. You've told me that often enough not to pay him account when he's like that. You feed up old Zoe, Mother, while I see to him. Oh, isn't he grand, Mother? He's red almost. Red Bay, you'd call him, wouldn't you? And that cross down his nose, isn't it perfect? Have you ever seen a horse with a white cross like that? Have you ever seen such a thing? I shall ride this horse when he's ready. I shall ride him everywhere, and there won't be a horse that will touch him. Not in the whole parish, not in the whole county. You're barely past 13, Albert, said his mother from the next stable. He's too young, and you're too young. And anyway, father told you not to touch him. So don't come crying to me if he catches you in there. But why the devil did he buy him, Mother? Albert asked. It was a calf we wanted, wasn't it? That's what he went to market for, wasn't it? A calf to suckle old Callandine. I know, dear. Your father's not himself when he's like that, his mother said very softly. He says that Farmer Easton was bidding for the horse, and you know what he thinks of that man after the barney over the fence. I should imagine he bought it just to deny him. Well, that's what it looks like to me. Well, I'm glad he did, Mother, said Albert, walking slowly towards him, pulling off his jacket. Drunk or not, it's the best thing he ever did. Don't speak like that about your father, Albert. He's been through a lot. It's not right, said his mother. But his words lacked conviction. Albert was about the same height as me and talked so gently as he approached that I was immediately calmed and not a little intrigued. And so stood where I was against the wall. I jumped at first when he touched me, but could see at once that he meant no harm. He smoothed my back first and then my neck, talked all the while he was doing it. How I would grow up to be the smartest horse in the whole wide world, and how we would go out hunting together. After a bit, he began to rub me gently with his coat. He rubbed me until I was dry, and then dabbed salt water onto my face where my skin had been rubbed raw. He brought in some sweet hay and a bucket of cool, deep water. I do not believe he stopped talking the whole time. As he turned to go out of the stable, I called out to him to thank him, and he seemed to understand, for he smiled broadly and stroked my nose. "We'll get along, you and I," he said kindly. "I shall call you Joey, only because it rhymes with Zoe, and then maybe, just maybe, because it suits you. I'll be out again in the morning. And don't worry, I'll look after you. I promise you that. Sweet dreams, Joey." "You should never talk to horses, Albert," said his mother from outside. "They never understand you. They're stupid creatures, obstinate and stupid. That's what your father says, and he knows horses all his life." "Father just doesn't understand them," said Albert. "I think he's frightened of them." I went over to the door and watched Albert and his mother walking away and up into the darkness. I knew then that I had found a friend for life. But there was an instinctive and immediate bond of trust and affection between us. Next to me, old Zoe leant over the door to try to touch me, but our noses would not quite meet. So that's the end of chapter 1, and you'll see that it was from the perspective of Joey the horse, and that's how the story continues. We hear the story told by Joey. Anyway, there'll be a new chapter tomorrow and every day after, hopefully.